Hamilton, and I am a 3L at the University of Oregon School of Law. I'm attending the Portland program, and I'm currently in a judicial externship. I'm also a co-director with now 6 other board members for the new iteration of LIRA UO, that's the Labor and Employment Relations Association chapter for the University of Oregon School of Law. We started in the law school, but now we've kind of broadened. We're looking to get actual recognition from the school at the ASUO organization. Let's see, the Oregon chapter of the Labor and Employment Relations Association is an organization that brings together labor management and neutrals to improve labor management relations, as well as to collaborate and identify barriers and to discuss best practices. Working with Oregon LIRA and with the help of the Law School's Career Center, LIRA UO is happy to introduce our panelists who have graciously taken their time today to share their respective career paths. First, and if you don't mind saying hello as I introduce you, we have Anil Karia. Anil is a founding member of the Public Safety Labor Group, a law firm that specializes in representing law enforcement unions. Anil specializes in representing law enforcement associations and guilds in Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Hello, Anil.
Good morning or good afternoon.
And Brina Lopez. Brina Moyer Lopez is a senior assistant attorney general in the Oregon Department of Justice, Labor and Employment Section, General Counsel Division. She also provides legal compliance advice and training to a variety of state agencies and represents state agency management in labor and employment related litigation. Hi, Brina. And Antonio or Tony Seguibo recently joined Quantum Health as Vice President of Sales for Labor, where he will be standing up a new labor market vertical. In the coming years, Tony will focus on working with the Taft-Hartley multi-employer health and welfare funds that currently provide healthcare coverage for over 10 million members nationwide.
Hey, Ashley. Hey, Lorelei. Good to see you guys.
Lisa Umschied was appointed by Governor Kate Brown to the Oregon Employment Relations Board in 2016. She's currently serving her second full term on the board. The board functions as an appellate tribunal for unfair labor practice cases between public employers and labor organizations, as well as civil service appeals from employees who work for state government. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, everyone.
And we also have Diana Winther. Diana Winther is both a member of and general counsel for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 48, which has jurisdiction in Oregon and Southwest Washington. She assists with contract negotiations and grievances, as well as advises her client in its role as an employer. Diana also acts as the representative for her union in various roles, including as the current president of the Oregon Labor and Relations Association. Hi, Diana.
Hello.
And thanks, everyone. I'm just going to go right ahead into our questions. I did circulate them to you all before, but I'm just going to go ahead and march down. If we don't mind, unless somebody has a particular order, if we can just go kind of as I presented you with these questions. So first, let's see. Can you please explain the work you currently do and give us a glimpse into what your typical day looks like for you and your work?
Well, I was introduced first, so I guess I'll go first, which means I actually have to bring my A game and not just copy Tony, which is what I am inclined to do usually. So I represent, I'm a union side lawyer, but which is already a very niche area of the law. I'll tell you, just sort of getting a touch ahead of myself here, that I never went to law school as, my first day as a 1L. I did not walk into the University of Oregon School of Law intending to walk out as a union side lawyer. And I certainly had my own path, which we'll get to. But, here I sit, I'm a union side lawyer. I've been practicing union side work since 2009. And as my sort of career has developed, I've really taken a niche practice of the law and figured out how to even narrow myself further into a deeper niche. Where I, at this point in my career, only represent police, corrections, and dispatch unions. And we are a firm of 6, soon to be 7 lawyers, which, if any of you have ever practiced in the labor management world, is a behemoth of a law firm for a private practice union side firm. And we do practice in 3 different states. And I'm a member of the Oregon, Washington, and Alaska bars, and then also myself do some consulting work in other states such as California and Colorado, and as far as Florida, as far east as Florida. You know, a day in the life of myself is I'm general counsel to these law enforcement unions, and so that includes things like collective bargaining agreements, whether new contracts or successor contracts, administering and giving advice on the terms of those collective bargaining agreements and labor organization rights under the Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act. You know, I give advice about disciplinary issues, about contract interpretation issues, you know, so if an employee is facing an administrative investigation, what are their due process rights under the law or the contract? You know, the union is seeking my assistance to ensure that their employee has due process during that administrative investigation. And then 5 minutes later, I may get a phone call about a sick leave issue where there's a sick leave provision in a contract that's been violated, and an employee is seeking redress under the collective bargaining agreement, and the union's asking my opinion about whether there's been a contract violation. I also serve as general counsel to some lobbying groups, which is a very interesting part of my practice, where I get to actually participate at somewhat of an arm's length in the legislative process. And, you know, I started doing that work a little bit later in my career, which is refreshingly sort of new and energizing, as opposed to folks only calling me with problems, which is probably about 80% of my practice. I get to participate in a process of trying to improve laws and trying to fix problems in existing bodies of laws. And that sort of legislative work, you know, I'm giving advice on what bills may mean if passed, to helping generate legislation for my clients. I get to be a little bit more creative and less sort of reactive and more proactive in my practice, which is nice. It's a very diverse practice. You know, there's some high profile sort of nature of my job also, where I, you know, assist in some communications and public relations pieces. It's no surprise to anybody that the relationship between law enforcement and the public has been strained. And, you know, my clients have been working very hard to improve those relationships, to rebuild trust, and you know, to ensure that the profession reflects as much as possible, you know, the will of the communities they serve. And so there's a whole nother sort of aspect of my practice where I'm engaging in something that is not sort of lawyering by any means, which is how to communicate what a profession does effectively to people, both pro and anti that profession. And so that gets very interesting. You know, I find myself being talked about on Twitter every once in a while, which is part of my lifelong endeavor to become a member of the Kardashian clan. I feel like is a step in that direction. It's you know, in short, it's interesting, it's varied, it keeps me on my toes, and as a practitioner, I really like the fact that it's, you know, every day can present something different.
Thank you very much, Anil. And I guess Ms. Lopez?
Thank you. So my name is Brina Lopez. I work at the Oregon Department of Justice in the Labor and Employment section of General Counsel. So, and it's funny because I would generally call myself more of an employment lawyer than a labor lawyer. Although honestly, during COVID, I think I shifted to be a little bit more labor than employment. But I really like what Anil was saying about the variety of the practice. And I feel like that is one of the things that I really like about my job as well. So in a typical day, at the department, in general counsel, our clients are all of the state agencies of the state of Oregon. And it's nice because unlike some of my colleagues in general counsel and other sections, they might just have one client, like they do ODOT all day long. But in the labor and employment section, we have a subject matter expertise rather than a client, contact. And so one day I might be helping DHS, the next day I might be helping the Department of Forestry, the next day I might be helping corrections, which is really fun and interesting. No 2 days are alike. And again, part of the day might be more of an employment law day where I'm consulting with a client about a sticky ADA issue or OFLA-FEMLA leave issue. We also do a lot of training, which I especially love. So one of the areas that I enjoy training about is investigations. How do we help our clients are generally the HR people, which is a great community of people, the HR world. So we get out there and we train about, hey, what are the best practices in doing an investigation of a civil rights complaint, for example. So that's really fun too. And at the same time, we represent, in addition to providing the advice work that we do, we also have the opportunity to represent clients in administrative hearings before the Employment Relations Board, which might be an unfair labor practice hearing, or with regard to state government, appeals of management and unrepresented people have a civil service due process component that goes to the IRB. So we might defend on a discipline of a manager, or else we would represent the agency in contract disputes and discipline grievances at the arbitration level. Our DOJ trial division would handle other employment litigation like civil rights and torts and things like that. So that's a typical day in my life.
Thank you very much. Mr. Seguiwa?
Yep. Ashley, thank you. And thank you and Lorelei for actually putting this together. I mean, I really think this is a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit about some of the various pathways that can lead to careers, especially for folks who are coming out of law school, or at least thinking about what does it mean to support organized labor. So I'm going to actually cheat a little bit because I think I shared with you and you kind of pointed it out at the beginning. I'm in the process of transitioning between two roles in two different organizations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both. And that way people can get a sense of what my typical day is going to look like and then what my typical day has looked like in the last 8 years. So I'm going to first focus on Quantum Health, and that, as you pointed out in the intro, I'm going to be the Vice President of Sales with an emphasis on focus on labor. Quantum Health is an organization that supports healthcare navigation, and that is essentially trying to wrap themselves around patients and plan participants to help them manage a complex healthcare issue. So typical scenario is somebody who is maybe just been recently diagnosed with cancer, and they're realizing they've got to actually think about pre-authorizations, they've got new medications, highly specialized clinicians, and they're struggling a little bit to find their way into those environments where they can actually get the medications they need, or at least get access to them. And so Quantum is the organization that's actually doing all the work in these pods that surround themselves around those patients. My job, so my typical day going forward is going to be doing the outreach to plan sponsors. And so with a very specific emphasis around those Taft-Hartley multi-employer trust funds. Those are those environments where you typically deal with trustees from multi-employer funds. Most commonly are the construction trades, but there's also the trucking industries, there's the hotel industries. All of those are where a large group of employers, typically in the same industry, have come together, brought monies to put into a trust fund, and then the group of trustees, both labor and management, will go out and procure a comprehensive healthcare program for their members. So my future day is going to be about reaching out to them, reaching out to some of their plan professionals, and talking a little bit about what the value of this program is and how we can actually bring those services to those members. Shifting gears and talking a little bit about what I've been doing the last 8 years, I'm just ending an 18-year stretch at working at Blue Cross Blue Shield. So while I was there, I had sort of 2 very specific, unique roles. The first 10 years, I was actually at a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, where I actually ran a department specifically focused on supporting account management. A large portion of our population there was labor, so that's kind of where the connection came from for me. And then the last 8 years, I spent at an office called the National Labor Office, which is a department within the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association that has a national footprint with responsibility to support labor teams throughout the entire country at Blue Cross Blue Shield plans. I'll just focus on the last 8 years with the NLO. A typical day there for me would be getting a call or receiving an inquiry from one of our plan contacts, realizing that there was some challenge going on with one of the health programs that they support. And what they would really be wanting to know is, did our office have any insight to the same type of challenge having been presented in another geography with another union that might be similar to the one that they're working on? And so me and my team would then sort of be on a quest to try to see if we could find that other issue having evolved somewhere else. And if we could find it, we would then sort of go a little bit deeper and ask, how did you deal with it? How did you resolve it? What were some of the pathways to a solution? What were some of the things that resonated with labor in that setting, so that we could then bring that back to our colleague who made the initial outreach at that point, and then talk to them about trying to present that as a possible solution, both within their own Blue plan, as well as with that labor customer that they were working with. I'll go one step a little bit further and just say that part of my days also included looking for success stories, really trying to reaching out to labor directly. So those folks who run plans, as well as some of the folks at the Blue plans that we work with, and asking them what were some of the successes that they had with trying to help members with their healthcare journey. What were some of the programs that they'd implemented that made a difference, and then take some of those components and then socialize them with other parts of the organization. So I'll stop there. I could probably go longer, but I'm gonna pause. Otherwise, we're gonna run out of time before this session is over entirely.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for that. And then Ms. Umsheed?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm really happy to see this panel come together, because I have the strong view that we need more new lawyers coming into the employment law field and the labor law field. So I'm really delighted to be here and encourage you all to think about this field. Like Tony, I'm also in the middle of a professional transition, but I'm going to talk about my current position, and then I'll just kind of put a pin in that, and I'll make a comment at the end about where I'm going. I'm currently one of 3 people who sits on the Employment Relations Board. The Employment Relations Board is the state analog to the National Labor Relations Board. We have jurisdiction over public employment in the state. So that includes cities and counties, state of Oregon, state government, higher education, K through 12 education, and then a whole range of other employers. There are several public hospitals in the state. And then there are a number of special districts all throughout the state that provide all kinds of services to Oregon residents, including utilities, fire, those kinds of things. So all of those employers are under our jurisdiction, and we do a range of essentially supervise labor law for the state. So we supervise and administer the formation of new bargaining units. We supervise elections for those units when new units are being formed. In this state, we don't have very many elections because we have a card check process. So most new bargaining units are typically formed through that process. Then there's a number of other procedures around the representation process, changing the formulation of bargaining units through unit clarification petitions, moving employees between bargaining units, that sort of thing. And then we also have kind of a quasi-judicial role in unfair labor practice charges. Most of those cases get tried to 3 administrative law judges who also work in our agency. Some of them get tried directly to the board itself, typically when there's some kind of an emergency type situation. And so when cases are tried to the administrative law judges, they come to the full board and as sort of an appeal posture. That's how we hear most of our cases. And then we hear and decide those cases, and they are appealed up to the Oregon Court of Appeals. And then for cases that we hear directly to the board, that looks like a trial happening in front of a 3-person panel, which is me and my 2 colleagues. And then the decisions in those cases are appealed to the Court of Appeals. And then, as Brina said, we also have, as part of our jurisdiction, civil service appeals for certain state employees. So that's kind of our jurisdiction and the way our agency is set up. And a typical day is ranging anywhere from something that looks like a very scholarship-oriented sort of day of reading over a record in a case, looking over the exhibits, listening to the testimony, researching the law, and then writing the decisions in cases, to, sitting and hearing lawyers presenting evidence directly to us. So it's a wide variety of typical days. And sometimes those, my day is involved almost totally with processing cases like that. And sometimes it's oriented more toward, we're making administrative decisions about the handling of petitions for representation for new bargaining units or to change bargaining units, and trying to make decisions about how those should be handled. So it's quite a wide variety of work. And one of the privileges of it is that I get to encounter and deal with lawyers from both sides of the table, both the labor side, this represented by Diana and Anil here today, and then also the management side, which is represented by Brina. So it's been a fun and rewarding experience. And I mentioned at the beginning that I'm in the middle of a transition. So at the next month, I'll be leaving the board and going back to my prior position at the Department of Justice, where I think I was sitting in the actual physical office where Brina is sitting right now. I think I recognize my own actual office that she stole when I left. So I'll be going back to DOJ, and hopefully Governor Brown will be soon appointing my replacement so that the work of the board can continue.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And finally, Diana, please go ahead.
As Ashley said, I'm Diana, and my days look similar to Anil's in the sense that, as being an exclusively labor side lawyer, we don't usually get a lot of positive requests from our client. The nice thing is I only have one client, and that's IBEW Local 48. And the bad thing about that client is it's about 5,700 people strong, which is awesome, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of stuff going on a regular basis. One way in which my day differs from Anil's is that people just walk into my office and sit down with their problem rather than calling me, so it is harder to ignore them. But my days are very varied. I don't do a lot of traditional litigation and arbitration because in the building trades world, it's often arbitration is handled by internal committees that make decisions on grievances rather than someone from the outside of the industry that may not know as much about it, trying to explain some of the particulars of why it is that we should have made those racks and they should not have been subcontracted to a non-union shop is complicated for people who don't do this stuff on a regular basis to fully understand. So the industry likes to regulate itself, which has its pluses and minuses. But majority of my members are construction electricians, but we also represent folks who do maintenance at like the city of Portland, the various ports in the area, Multnomah County. We also represent people that aren't electricians at all. So we have folks that work at KGW. We actually just started negotiations for them, and I'm sitting in on those. We represent people at the All Classical radio station. We even represent the folks who work for the Oregon AFL-CIO, so the state body that manages all the labor unions in the state. Those are actually our members because we have a really great pension and healthcare plan, basically. So luckily their employer wants to treat them well and give them good benefits. But yeah, so contract negotiations, grievances, advising my client as an employer when my boss gets mad and wants to fire people, and I say that's not a good idea. I have an unemployment appeal tomorrow morning, followed by a LIRA meeting, followed by revising my hiring hall rules, which are highly regulated by the federal government because of the way that our employment structure is in the construction world. And then later this week, I leave to go to Vegas for a training about how not to get my health and welfare trust sued by poor choices I make as a trustee. So never a dull moment. I am never bored. Sometimes I wish I were, but I wouldn't change it for anything.
Thank you so much. And I did want to take a chance to offer questions of our participants at all, or anybody in the audience who'd like to send in a chat question. I'm not sure how I could access the room, the physical room there. I don't know if there's but seeing no, okay, seeing no questions, I'll just go right on into the next one. I'll try to lump together some of the questions. If you, the first part is if you could basically talk to yourself as a new law student, or go back and maybe choose particular courses or have certain experiences to take advantage of that serve your role now, what would those be? And then second, what keeps you, and I know everybody kind of mentioned it, but specifically what kind of keeps you passionate about the work you do now? I think we can go back, maybe start with Tony this time, maybe not.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Neil.
Oh, I'm happy. So if I were going to go back right now and talk to myself as a 1L, and I was going to think about the 3-year journey in law school and the work that I'm doing today, I would definitely have focused a little bit more on healthcare. So I would have actually taken the time to understand administrative and regulatory sort of environment in particular, because I think that as I came out of law school, I understood the law. I was a trial lawyer in training. That's actually how I first entered in my profession. And as I entered into healthcare, I didn't understand some of the nuances associated with sort of that regulatory environment. So I would definitely go back and give myself that one little tap on the shoulder and say, focus on these courses as you're going through law school. I think the second part of your question was around, and you have to remind me what that second part was.
What keeps you passionate about it?
Okay, sorry, yeah, that part's easier. So when I got out of, after I got out of law school, I entered a law firm environment at first, and so I was first working in the construction defect litigation area, and then right before I left the practice, I worked for another law firm for almost a year and a half doing work comp, and I was in that setting when I realized that there were a large population of workers who were just simply not being treated fairly in the work setting, and in that situation is a very narrow issue, which is really around getting hurt on the job and whether or not those injuries were being addressed, both from how the accident happened, the rules under which everyone agreed work comp would exist at all, and then whether or not the benefits were flowing to them as promised. And so that part of it got me passionate about sort of being a worker advocate. I then had the opportunity to be invited to work for a labor union directly as their general counsel. And I did that both by leaving the traditional practice of law and entering, similar to what Diana does today, and entering actually working for a union directly. And in that setting, that's really where my interest in supporting workers grew and evolved and has remained consistent to today. Over the next 10 years while I was at the union, I helped with organizing, I served as a trustee, but all the time really thinking back to those early days around, what is the role that I can play? What is the work that I can do that supports the member, making the lives of our members better? And that really keeps me focused in general. And as I left the law firm environment and really then took a deeper dive into the healthcare space, I again continued to think about health plans, in particular, the Blue Cross system, really do think about their plan participants as members. And so the bridge between a member of a union and a member of a health plan is very similar in the sense that what is the plan doing to try to help make the lives of the person better? What can we do to help them have access to affordable care, have access to high quality care? And it's those kinds of issues really coming back to, everything we do should be driving towards improving the lives of those individuals. And that keeps me focused. And as I look forward to this concept of healthcare navigation, it is narrowly targeted at supporting a plan participant and a patient. And to me, that's going to be an easy part of the work that I'm going to get to do, because I think it comes back to sort of those original roles of making sure that individuals are getting what they need at the time that they need it.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate that. And I'm just going to go kind of snake across my screen. So then Lisa, if you don't mind, you're up next.
Sure. I think it sounds like my at least initial years in the practice maybe have been somewhat similar to Tony's, in that I started as an associate in a law firm with a litigation emphasis and kind of learning how to be a litigator. When I started, which was in 1992, we did not yet have the proliferation of all of these labor and employment oriented law firms in the same kind of way that exist today. That was a time period, could it before the FMLA and before the Americans with Disabilities Act and before the remedies were expanded under Title VII. And so there were some law firms that specialized in labor and employment, but it was a fraction of what you see now in terms of opportunities. So I started just as a general kind of litigation associate. And I guess I was probably about 5 or so years into my career, and I was assigned to a big defend with a bunch of other people all over the country, a big class action against Taco Bell for a number of wage and hour violations, including allegedly working its employees off the clock and asking people to work through breaks and a number of things like that. And that happened to just be this kind of just serendipitous. I just kind of ended up in employment law. And that case was so big and took so many years that it just kind of took my career in the direction of being an employment lawyer. And then after that, I went to work for Metro, which is the regional government for the Portland area. And I was their employment lawyer. And because their workforce is organized, I got to learn how to become a labor lawyer as well on the management side. So that's sort of how my career developed. And since that time, I've essentially been working in labor and employment law exclusively, most of the time working either for serving public sector employers. In terms of if I were talking to myself as a law student today, things that I think were formative or really important, I would say probably the most important thing for me, or an important thing, was just happening to have really great mentors in the early years. My original mentor, who I worked with right out of law school, now we've known each other for 30 years, and she's continued to be one of my dearest friends. She's now retired from the practice, and we still see each other, every couple of months. In fact, we're having dinner together next week. And if you can find someone to play that kind of a role in your professional life, it just pays so many dividends to just have someone. In my case, we're 20 years apart in age, to just have someone who is that much ahead of you in life and in career to kind of teach you and guide you, sometimes sort of quietly behind the scenes. It's just incredibly invaluable. So I would list that. And then I also have had really great opportunities participating in the activities of the Oregon State Bar over the years. And one of my earlier formative experiences was serving for many, many years on the executive committee of the government law section of the bar. And through that activity, I met all of these lawyers that I never otherwise would have encountered in just my practice. So now I see them actually, some of them coming before us or involved as witnesses in cases, which tells you how small Oregon is. It's a very small state and a very small professional world. But just participating in activities like state bar activities or Oregon LIRA or groups like that, where you are encountering and making professional friends with, and sometimes personal friends with, people that you work with in your professional life, really adds kind of a complexity and level of enjoyment to the work that we do. In terms of what keeps me passionate about my work, I would just cite something that one of my union lawyer friends said to me probably a decade and a half ago, which is that management side employment and labor lawyers are just the people doing civil rights on the inside. And that's how I think of the work that I do. In this current role is a little different because I'm a neutral, but as a management lawyer, what kept me going is always, we're trying to keep the workplace fair for workers, where it's kind of an underappreciated role. And if you're doing your job well, sometimes no one ever sees you do it. So you have to be intrinsically motivated, but that's kind of what keeps me passionate.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much. And Anil, you are next.
Thanks. My response to the first question is probably a little bit philosophical. I sort of looking back, I wouldn't change my path. I think my path sort of through law school for me was part of my journey. Like I sort of hinted at when I first started talking, I didn't, in my goal professionally when I entered law school was not to be spit out of the machine as a union side lawyer. And I had a different, sort of a unique path. I had a career before I came to law school or went to law school. I lived in a completely different part of the States. I lived in New York City in my 20s. It was fantastic, great experience. I lived there during 9/11, which was an eye-opening experience, probably the first time I truly understood what the phrase time to gaze at my navel a little bit meant in terms of sort of professional endeavors. I had a finance background. I went to law school and was sort of drawn, just given my sort of prior career, to the commercial sort of civil side of the legal field, and spent my time in law school sort of exploring different areas. One thing I would encourage folks to do is be explorative in law school, check out different areas of the law. I sort of during law school, I had no interest in criminal law. And what I do now, I'm a union side lawyer, but I am very familiar with criminal law because members of the unions I represent are enforcing criminal laws. And so I have to sort of understand criminal law and the criminal procedural system in our American justice system, both from sort of a tangible daily sort of interface to sort of the policy underpinnings of those systems. So if I am going to self-critique a little bit about my own journey, I probably was too focused or too sort of narrow-minded in pursuing what I wanted to pursue during law school. I definitely enjoyed my path. I had opportunities to do, sounds like what Ashley is doing, working for a judge in an externship type environment, which was a fantastic experience. I spent time at a very prominent Portland commercial litigation firm, both during law school and for my immediate career after. And sort of looking back, what I talk to current law students about and encourage them to do is find a path, find experiences, whether it's looking for a job during the summer or taking a particular class that reflects your values and interests and passions, right? And take this opportunity to find what drives you. For my career transition in 2009, it was really twofold. For me, part of my values is when I looked at sort of our day-to-day lives, I put primacy on the people more than the company, and I worked in a private sector law firm. I understood the importance of the existence of a company to provide the jobs, but the lens that I saw the world through better aligned with the interests of an individual worker than it did with the interests of the corporation. That's not to say that, I was going to burn the company's building down, but that slight sort of subtle shift in how my profession reflected my values really sort of pushed me in a different direction. And I found an opportunity on the union side to sort of explore that. And I looked at that as an exploration, and it was a fit. What I do today fits my values, it fits my interests, and it fits the passions that I want professionally. And then to that second question, since we're talking about, what keeps me passionate, it's sort of simple for me. I enjoy it. It keeps me on my toes. I don't, at the end of the day, and this may sound a little bit corny, but I don't feel like I wasted my day at work. I felt like I did something and I enjoyed it. And I got to sort of exercise my intellectual abilities and my people abilities. And that feels good. And, I think I'd encourage folks to not, especially law students, is, find your own path that can get you to those passions. And in a daily sense of it, sort of building off of what Lisa said, one of the values, and this was sort of the second piece of my transition to the union side, was I didn't like fighting 10 hours a day, and I was a corporate litigator, right? And my job was to fight over why the shoelace deliveries didn't happen on time pursuant to the contract. And I was drawn to the opportunity to be collaborative. The labor management relationship, you'll always hear practitioners in our field say this, is a relationship. And I can't burn my relationship with Brina if I'm working with her on an issue. If we've got a contentious discipline case, I know the next day when that case is over, I got to pick up the phone and talk to Brina about another issue that we got to work through together. And I appreciate that collaborative approach because I feel like professionally, and again, it fits with my values, I'm helping people solve problems. And that I find fulfilling because it's an opportunity to sort of touch somebody's everyday life and in an attempt to make it a little bit better.
Thank you very much, Anil, and that was wonderful. And then Diana, you're next on my list.
Okay. If I was going to give anyone advice, if I could look back, I would encourage them to do similar to what Anil was talking about. I actually maxed out on my externship credits while I was in law school. So I did as much out of the classroom work as I could because I didn't really like sitting in the classroom a whole lot, but also it gave me a better sense of what it was that I was interested in and what I wasn't interested in. So like I work for Northwest Workers Justice Project, and they do a lot of representation for undocumented people, wage theft, those sorts of things. Worked for the Oregon Education Association, so the teachers union, worked for the Labor Education Research Center actually at the U of O, doing some research about the disadvantages of charter schools. I also spent my last year clerking for the St. Andrew Legal Clinic, which is a low bono family law clinic. And that taught me that I did not want to do that. Mad props to anybody that can do that and not get super burned out. I knew I wasn't going to be one of those people because I wanted to still like people at the end of the day. And in this job, I get to do that. But the other piece of advice I would say is don't be afraid to say yes. I ended up in my job here at Local 48. This is the only job I've had. And if I'm really lucky, this will be the only job I have until I retire. I was told by a friend who was now works for the National Labor Relations Board down in Arizona that she had someone she wanted me to meet, that he liked to mentor law students. This was towards the end of my 3L year, so I'm obviously super interested in meeting anyone and everyone that could possibly lead to me having a job. So I sat down with Norman Melvin, who was general counsel of local at the time. We went out to Chinese food, family style, and she started asking me about, my career in law school and who I knew, and kept taking notes, which I thought was kind of odd. But my friend Sarah had warned me that he was a little bit of an odd individual, so I wasn't going to judge. And after all, this is where I'm busy trying to make friends, not enemies. And at the end, when we get back to the union hall, he says, "Do you know why I invited you to lunch today?" And I said, "Because you like to mentor law students." And he said, "I am retiring. I want you to come meet my boss." And so I sat down and met the business manager at the time, and we chatted. They were trying to decide whether they wanted to go with someone who was more established or someone they could mold into whatever they wanted to be, and they opted for the molding option. So here I sit, and I have not gotten fired yet, which is always a stress for people who are in-house for a union, because based on the union structure, but on average every 3 years we have internal elections, and so my boss could change and fire everyone that works here. So becoming intrinsically part of the local and having a lot of institutional knowledge is always a good spot to be in if you end up in an in-house counsel position like mine. I could still get fired, even though I represent people who have contracts. I don't actually work under one, but I wouldn't change it for anything, because I'm passionate about what I do, because I get to help change people's lives. We just organized last week 71 employees at shop. So we are going to be starting their negotiations shortly, hopefully get them better, wages and benefits, but more importantly, giving them some consistency in how they're being treated, having some solid workplace rules, but as Anil said, and everyone else has kind of mentioned too, that, management and labor, it is a relationship. And so it's always tricky when you're starting the relationship, because the new contract management obviously thinks that they did something wrong because their workers decided to organize, when a lot of times it's not that as much as it is just wanting to have that consistency and having everyone follow the same rules and know what those rules are and be respectful and have dignity in the workplace. So I get to work on that stuff every day. And I am grateful for it. So don't be afraid to say yes to things. Don't think that you're not qualified necessarily. You might not be, but you'll figure it out. Like I said, I haven't gotten fired yet. So it's, but definitely seek out those experiences, so that way when someone asks you what you're passionate about, you've got a sense of what that is.
Thank you, Diana. And Brina, yep, you can answer as well.
All right, well, thank you. If I could talk to myself back in law school, I think I could only say you have no idea what life will bring. I went to law school thinking that I would really like to be an immigration attorney. And I ended up getting my first job out of law school at the Legal Aid Services of Oregon Farm Workers section. And interesting, Diana, you said you work for the Northwest Workers Justice Project. I was hired for that job by Michael Dale, who was the head of that. So, and I did a tiny bit of immigration in that role, but I was mostly doing employment law, representing migrant and seasonal farm workers and wage and hour issues. And there's a special body of law that covers farm workers at the federal level. Anyway, I did that for several years, ended up transitioning into the more basic legal aid office, the non-farm worker, although I kept my foot in it a little bit, where I did do family law. And God knows, if you can do family law, you can do anything. That's a lot of conflict. Anyway, so I just, and interestingly, I spent a very brief period of time over there as the president of the Legal Aid Workers Union, which is part of the National United Auto Worker Union. But it was a great opportunity to hone skills. I will always put a plug in for legal aid. You know, everybody should think about that as a job. I thought I was going to be a career legal aid person, frankly, and it's a wonderful career. It's also a wonderful place to start a career because you get thrown in the deep water, doing all sorts of interesting things across a wide variety of practice areas. So anyway, I was lucky enough to come over to DOJ about 9 years ago. And what keeps me going is just the variety of work that we have every day. And frankly, I really like the people that I work with. No matter where you end up going, that's what matters. It matters that you enjoy coming to work every day. It matters that you like the people that you can bounce ideas off of every day, and who can mentor you, and that at a certain point you can become a mentor too. So no matter what you're doing, you know, if something just feels like you're burning out, ask yourself whether maybe you need a different path. And sometimes you do, and don't be afraid to take it if the opportunity arises.
All right, and with that, thank you so much to our panelists. We have about 10 minutes left. I do have some kind of, anybody can answer questions if we don't get anything from our audience, but if anybody would like to ask our panelists anything, please do. Any takers on that? Okay, I did have one question that some of us at the Lyra UO, I just want to put a plug for that. Again, we're a new student chapter here at Lyra, and we're trying to get our ASUO application. We're already a recognized law student organization, but we're trying to become multidisciplinary. So we had an interest from some MBA students and then the CRES program here at the school as well. And that's the conflict resolution graduate degree program. So we're trying to get all those involved. Again, I'm the management committee chair. Molly Goulet is the pro-labor chair, and Hadley Underwood is the CRES chair, or the neutral chair. We do have, oh, just somebody saying thank you everyone for attending. There's only a few people left. I did have one question. It's kind of for my own interest. And it's because kind of coming on the heels of the CLE that was recently attended, 20th annual expo. How has the pandemic in particular really affected or changed the labor relations, just how people can come together? Has it been good? Has it been bad, in your view? And that's just to the room for these last like 5 minutes or so.
I'm going to just jump in because my area of focus is not labor relations really targeted, although I do come out of an environment where I am working with both because I'm in an environment that's considered fairly neutral. I'm actually working with labor and employment on a regular basis. And so what I'll just say about the pandemic and the virtual environment versus the in-person environment, and to me, that was the biggest part of it. It wasn't about what the reaction was to sort of the changes that happened in the workplace. I think there's a lot of conversation that could happen about how the pandemic and the vaccine was sort of treated. And I think there's a long discussion that could happen there. I'll just say this, that as we come through it in 2022, what my biggest observation is that there's a drive to come back. There's a drive to take advantage of the lessons learned from working virtually and working sort of in a virtual environment, but still a drive towards sort of maximizing the time that we can spend together. And as folks do come back into those in-person environments in particular, I think you're going to have richer conversations. They're going to actually appreciate that time even more. And they're going to try to leave behind sort of those things that can be resolved before those meetings happen. And so that those investments that are being made for those in-person meetings are actually truly maximized. And I think that's going to mean that we're going to make decisions will be made. Those meetings will be scheduled with that purpose in mind. So that's what I see on the horizon. That's what I've seen occurring as early as good portions of this year, and even the intention that I see planning for 2023.
Thank you, Tony. And any of our other panelists want to address the question? Or?
I agree with Tony in a lot of his sentiments. You know, I'll answer it sort of selfishly for my practice, and not get into whether the vaccination was legal constitutionally or not. That will drive the rest of the room away. But selfishly, there are. I'm down with the hybrid system that at least I've been operating in of late. Allows me to pick and choose where I can be efficient with my time as a practitioner and sort of, bang out a whole bunch of work and meetings with a 15-minute Zoom call rather than me driving an hour each way for a 15-minute meeting. And so I feel more efficient from sort of a work-life balance. I like it. I've missed fewer kids events and soccer games and t-ball games and whatnot, just because there's, I think, more socially within the workplace acceptable to have that as a Zoom formatted meeting rather than an in-person meeting. With that said, and I agree with Tony here, is very selective, but very purposeful when it comes time to meeting in person. And so much of labor relations for what I do is built on that relationship and that communication. And, with the line of work that I do, sitting down face to face with the police chief or the sheriff from our county when we're working through an issue, doing that in person, where we've got that relationship pre-built or in an effort to build that relationship, that in-person contact cannot be replicated from my experience over a computer screen. It's much different to shake somebody's hand and to sit down and to have a cup of coffee together and look at each other when you're communicating. And so, from my side, I'm still trying to figure out where that perfect sweet spot balance is between the two, but I think there's definitely room, and I'm pushing for room for both of those styles of communications.
Yeah, and I would just add, if I could, if there just for a few minutes on the, we saw, of course, everybody shift to a virtual format for presenting cases, both, regular trial type cases and then oral argument, more appellate style presentations. And my observation is that there's a huge upside for access to justice with virtual hearings. We do miss a lot of the, there's a certain sort of formality and ritual that comes with taking your clients to a formal hearing room and sitting in front of a hearings officer or the board with a big flag and the state seal in the background. Those things are important in terms of communicating the seriousness and solemnity of, legal proceedings. And the other side of that, though, is, we had cases where we had a whole, 3 Zoom screens of people watching the hearing, and that just would not have happened if all of those people, I'm thinking of one case we had down in Klamath Falls with a newly organized employer, the big higher ed institution down there. And there was a lot of conflict around their first contract bargaining that turned into a big case. And we had people both from the bargaining unit and from management were able to sit and watch the hearing that took, 4 days of testimony. And that would not have happened if those folks had to make a choice to take time off from their work and drive all the way to Salem. So I think in terms of access to justice and exposure of what we're doing to the people whose lives are affected by what we're doing, some virtual proceedings have a real upside and a positive impact.
Thank you, Lisa. And with our last 2 minutes here, I just want to say thank you again to all of our panelists. This was wonderful. And I hope that, because we do have some 1Ls, you guys are available for when they reach out next year for another career panel, hopefully. So I'll be passing on your names to that individual. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, panelists.
Thank you all.
Take care, guys. All right. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.